Yeah, I mean, it's so fascinating to me that corporate media outlets and the employees who work for them love incessantly to talk about the dangers of fake news and disinformation. And they love to lament the fact that people now turn away from them and no longer believe them and believe these sources of information that they regard as inferior to them or less reliable than they are. And in the course of lamenting this pathology, which is a genuine problem, you need a society, if it's going to be healthy, a democracy, if it's going to be healthy, to have sources of information that most people in this society, even if they have different ideologies, can more or less trust to tell them what's going on in the world. And if you lose that, you lose a really important stabilizing force, an ability for people to even have shared perceptions of the facts and reality. And all the discussions about how that's happening and how bad it is, they almost never stop and ask the question, why has that happened? Because the answer is they play a central role in why people have lost faith and trust in those institutions of journalism that have long been regarded as legitimate by most people. They were the ones who sold the country the lies that led to the invasion of Iraq. They were the ones who glorified the people who brought us the 2008 financial crisis, from which people continue to suffer to this very day. And people are not dumb. They understood. They saw for themselves that the media was willing to do and say anything to stop Donald Trump. And once you have this series of episodes that justifiably and validly cause a huge portion of the population to no longer place their faith and trust in established corporate media institutions, of course they're going to start looking elsewhere for their news. And I do regard that as genuinely tragic, even though I believe the people who are doing that are acting appropriately. I also don't trust those institutions. I regard it, though, as damaging, because I do think a healthy society needs a kind of group of institutions you can rely on and trust. And part of my project is not to try and destroy these institutions, but to try and rebuild faith and trust in journalism by showing that it can still be done in a way that it can inspire confidence among people who have differing religious values, political beliefs, ideologies, and the like.
And Glenn, what would you say to those people who go, look, here's the reality. The media have always been lying to us. They've always been trying to pull the wool over our eyes. It's just now, in 2016, in the age of the internet, we are able to see it for ourselves.
There's definitely validity to that argument. As you probably know, before I became a journalist, I was working as a lawyer, a constitutional lawyer, and I started writing about politics at the end of 2005. I just created a kind of free blog on what was called Blogspot at the time, this free blogging platform from Google, in large part because I was looking at the developments in the wake of 9/11 and the war on terror, and felt that the media was not only ignoring really crucial assaults on civil liberties, but often was lying about what was taking place. And the more I looked, it was the first time I paid attention as a full-time job to politics and journalism as opposed to law. The more I began realizing that this has been a long-standing problem. Throughout the Cold War, the CIA partnered with all of the major corporate institutions, media institutions in the United States to disseminate propaganda. They would engineer coups, and they would have Time Magazine or the New York Times call it, a popular revolution or blow against tyranny. Conversely, when they had democratically elected leaders they didn't like, they would have those media outlets call them tyrants, and then hail the replacements who were anointed by the U.S. with no votes as protectors of democracy. So this closeness between the security state and large-standing corporate media outlets has been going on, again, since the security state was created at the end of World War II. And as I said, that's the reason why it wasn't right-wing media outlets that helped the Bush administration sell the country on the Iraq War. It was the liberal outlets like the New York Times and the New Yorker and the Atlantic and NBC News, because those institutions, despite being more liberal on cultural issues, were completely inextricably linked with and deferential to the government, and that created all kinds of deceit and propaganda. So it isn't that it's a new problem at all. I've been writing about it long before anyone dreamed that Donald Trump could be president. Obviously, many other people before me were doing the same. I think that what happened in the Trump administration is that all of that went on to steroids. At the very least, even though the media often propagandize on questions of, say, foreign policy and barely ever questioned the security state, when it came to the kind of day-to-day trivial warfare between the two primary political parties, the Republicans and Democrats, they would at least make an effort to have a pretense of objectivity between the two parties, not to favor one or the other. And that, I think, is more than anything what that one kind of notion of fairness that they were clinging to, ultimately even that got destroyed. So they just became open propaganda arms of the Democratic Party and engaged in open warfare against the Republican Party, all in the name of stopping Donald Trump. And I think that's what took what was already clearly a systemic problem, but made it a much, much greater problem and a more visible problem than ever before.
So, Glenn, what about now, though? Because, look, they got what they wanted. Joe Biden as president, the Democrats are, free to do almost whatever they want. The kids are still in cages, but they don't have to cover it and all of that.
They're not cages anymore, they're detention facilities.
That's correct. Of course they are. And so why are their brains still broken? They got Trump out. Why can't they just relax and start reporting the truth now?
Well, for one thing, if you look at what has happened to them, a lot of people forget that before Trump came down that golden escalator with Melania in 2015 and announced that he was running for president, most of these media outlets were on the verge of complete financial ruin. You can go back and find, for example, in articles in 2014 and 2015 that MSNBC was on the verge of firing its entire primetime lineup with the exception of Rachel Maddow because nobody was watching their shows. And the New York Times, people really doubted whether they were going to actually be able to have a sustainable financial model. Trump saved almost the entire media industry single-handedly. Ratings went through the roof. Enormous numbers of books were sold. People got very rich off, activism and warnings over Donald Trump. The ACLU was laying off its entire workforce basically in the Obama years. No one wanted the ACLU suing Obama on the grounds that he was acting unconstitutionally. But then soon as, they positioned themselves as the primary opponent to Trump, they're drowning in money. Mm-hmm. So they don't want, he's a cash cow. They don't want to, go back to just talking. No one wants to hear about Joe Biden. And that's why their audience is disappearing. And it's disappearing very quickly. So they're just desperate, trying to kind of pump life into this corpse that is the Trump presidency. But people know he's gone, and so it's not working. It is true that even though Trump is no longer in power, there is his movement that still has some degree of influence. I mean, there's members of Congress and the Senate who still espouse his ideology. One of them is going to be the Republican nominee almost certainly in 2024 if Trump himself, as they're hoping and praying on their knees on a daily basis, runs again himself in 2024. So part of it is just the profit model, being the villain, the scary monster, right? It's like, if you have the Game of Thrones, you can't kill off Cersei, the queen, because who are you going to hate and care about and be angry towards? That's kind of what Trump is for these media outlets. So they need to kind of prop them up and keep them alive and convince themselves that the threat is still there. But also I think some of them, again, do genuinely believe that there's this fascist movement lurking in the United States, ready to take over at any moment. And the hysteria and mania and paranoia and delusions and psychological and anxiety disorders that govern their brains and have since 2016 really haven't gone anywhere. And so you listen to them and it does sound like they think it's 2018, in part because they want it to be and need it to be, but also in part because they still believe that it really is.